Keithnar stood before the observation window of the cloaked vessel and watched the stars drift by in silence. He was young for a Valorian analyst, barely 40 cycles old, and this was his first real assignment beyond the homeworld. His superiors had called it simple. They had called it routine. They had said he would learn much from watching a primitive species fall in battle. The species in question was called humans. Keithnar had studied their files for weeks before departing. They were a young race, barely 300 years into space travel. They had soft bodies, short lifespans, and technology that the Valorian hegemony considered outdated by several generations. They were not particularly strong. They were not particularly fast. Their ships were crude things held together by metal and determination. And now they were at war. The Cree Dominion had decided to raid a human colony world called New Haven. The Cree were raiders by nature, a species that took what they wanted and destroyed what they could not take. They had assembled a fleet of 40 warships for this operation. It was excessive force by any measure. The humans had only 12 ships in the region capable of responding. Keithnar's mission was simple: observe the battle, record the data, return home with a complete analysis of human combat capabilities. His senior analyst, a weathered veteran named Valorth, had laughed when the orders came through. "There will be nothing to observe," he had said. 40 ships against 12. The humans will break and run within the first hour. If they are smart, they will surrender. If they are foolish, they will die. Either way, we will have our data and be home before the next cycle. Keithnar had nodded and said nothing. He had learned early in his career that junior analysts did not question their seniors. But something about this mission made him uneasy. He could not say why. The observation vessel was called the Silent Witness, and it lived up to its name. The ship was invisible to all known sensor systems, drifting through space like a ghost. There were 6 analysts aboard, plus a small crew to maintain the vessel. Their job was to watch and record. They were forbidden from interfering in any way. Keithnar spent his days reviewing human military doctrine. He found it strange and confusing. The humans seemed to value something they called individual initiative, which meant that lower-ranking officers were expected to make decisions on their own without waiting for orders. This seemed chaotic and dangerous to Keithnar. In Valorian military tradition, orders flowed from the top down, and obedience was absolute. The humans also had a concept they called acceptable losses. Keithnar's translation device struggled with this phrase. It seemed to mean that the humans expected some of their own people to die in battle and had already decided which deaths they could tolerate. This was disturbing. Valorian doctrine focused on minimizing casualties at all costs. War was a calculation, a balance of resources and outcomes. Death was waste, and waste was failure. But the humans seemed to see it differently. They wrote about sacrifice in their historical texts. They celebrated those who died for their people. They built monuments to the fallen and told stories about last stands and desperate charges. Keithnar did not understand this. He filed it away as the confused philosophy of a young species that had not yet learned the true nature of war. The human fleet arrived in a New Haven system 3 days before the expected CRT attack. Keithnar watched their ships take up positions between the colony world and the most likely approach vectors. There were 12 vessels in total. The flagship was called the Steadfast, a heavy cruiser that looked old and battered even by human standards. It was commanded by a human male named Jack Reyes. Keithnar pulled up the commander file. Reyes was 52 years old, which was considered late middle age for humans. He had served in the human fleet for 30 years. He had fought in border skirmishes and pirate actions and small conflicts that barely registered in galactic records. He had never faced anything like a full CF raiding fleet. None of the humans had. On the second day, Keithnar intercepted a communication from the Steadfast to the colony below. It was Commander Reyes speaking to the planetary governor. "We know what's coming," Reyes said. His voice was calm and steady. 40 ships, maybe more. I won't lie to you, the math isn't in our favor. There was a pause. Keithnar could hear the fear in the governor's response, though the words were too distorted to make out clearly. "I understand," Reyes continued, "but I need you to understand something too. We're not leaving. Every ship I have is staying right here between you and them. We're going to buy you time. We're going to make them bleed for every kilometer they advance. And when it's over, one way or another, they're going to remember that they came to New Haven and found something they didn't expect." The transmission ended. Keithnar sat in silence for a long moment, trying to process what he had heard. The humans knew they were outmatched. They knew the numbers were against them. And yet, they were not running. They were not negotiating. They were preparing to fight a battle. They could not win. Valoriaanse appeared at Keithnar's station and glanced at the transmission log. "Brave words," he said with a dismissive gesture. "All primitive species make such speeches before they are crushed. It means nothing. When the CTH arrive, the humans will see the size of the fleet and their courage will fail. They always do." Keithnar nodded, but he was not so certain. That night he reviewed more human history. He found records of a battle called Termob, where 300 warriors had held a mountain pass against an army of thousands. He found stories of a place called the Alamo, where a small group of defenders had fought to the last against overwhelming odds. He found accounts of a city called Stalingrad, where humans had fought building by building, room by room, dying by the millions rather than surrender. He began to notice a pattern. Humans did not seem to calculate war the way Valoriaans did. They did not weigh lives against outcomes and choose the most efficient path. They fought for reasons that went beyond logic. They fought for pride, for honor, for something they called spite. Keithnar added a note to his observation log. The humans appear unaware of the mathematical certainty of their defeat. Further observation required to determine if this is ignorance or something else entirely. He did not sleep well that night. In his dreams, he saw the human commander standing on the bridge of his battered ship, staring out at the stars with calm eyes, waiting for the storm to come. And somewhere in the darkness of space, 40 Cree warships were moving closer. The Cree fleet arrived exactly on schedule. Keithnar watched the sensor display as 40 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their dark hulls gleaming with weapons arrays and shield generators. Each ship was a masterpiece of destruction, built for one purpose and one purpose only. The bridge of the silent witness fell quiet as the analysts gathered around the main display. Valor stood at the center, his arms folded across his chest, his expression calm and almost bored. He had seen this before. He knew how it would end. "Standard Cree attack formation," he announced to the room. "They will advance in 3 waves. The first wave will test the human defenses. The second wave will break them. The third wave will finish the survivors while the landing ships move on the colony." Keithnar said nothing. He was watching the human ships. The 12 vessels of the human fleet held their position between the Cree armada and the planet below. They had arranged themselves in a loose defensive screen, spread out to cover as much space as possible. It was a standard defensive pattern, the kind any military academy would teach. Commander Reyes transmitted on an open channel. His voice was the same as before, calm and steady, as if he were discussing the weather rather than facing his own death. "All ships, this is Steadfast. You know why we're here. You know what we're protecting. Stay sharp, stay angry, and make them pay for every shot they take." The Cree fleet began its advance. The first wave of 15 ships moved forward, their weapons powering up, their shields glowing with energy. At current speed, they would reach weapons range in approximately 12 minutes. Keithnar prepared his recording equipment. This would be the moment the humans would see the overwhelming force coming toward them, and their formation would break. Some would run, some would surrender. A few brave fools might fight and die quickly. It was the same pattern every primitive species followed when facing superior firepower. Then the humans did something Keithnar did not expect. 3 ships broke away from the defensive formation. They were frigates, smaller vessels designed for speed rather than firepower. Their names appeared on Keithnar's display: Hellcat, Ironside, and Tempest. They were commanded by a young officer named Kate Morrison. The 3 frigates did not move to reinforce the defensive line. They did not move to intercept the incoming wave. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the Cree fleet at maximum speed. Keithnar checked his instruments. He ran the calculations 3 times. The frigates were not maneuvering to engage the enemy. They were charging straight through the formation. "What are they doing?" one of the junior analysts asked. Valor made a sound of contempt. "Suicide run. Some species prefer death to surrender. The frigates will be destroyed in seconds. It changes nothing." But Keithnar was not so sure. He watched the 3 small ships racing toward 40 warships, and he felt something cold settle in his stomach. The humans were not panicking. Their formation was tight and controlled. They were following a plan. The Cree commander clearly shared Valor's opinion. The enemy fleet did not bother to adjust its formation. Why would they? 3 frigates against 40 warships was not a threat. It was a gesture, nothing more. The frigates entered the Cree formation at full speed. Enemy ships opened fire. The Hellcat took a direct hit to its port side and lost nearly half its hull. The Ironside's shields failed within seconds. The Tempest was burning from multiple impacts. They did not slow down. The 3 crippled frigates punched through the Cree formation like bullets through paper. Ships that should have been dead kept flying. Crews that should have been fleeing kept fighting. They emerged from the other side of the enemy fleet, battered and broken, trailing debris and fire. And then Keithnar understood. The frigates were not attacking. They were positioning. They were now behind the CH fleet. Commander Reyes spoke again, his voice cutting through the chaos of battle communications. Morrison, light them up. The 3 frigates opened fire on the Cree ships from behind. Their weapons targeted engine sections and shield generators, the vulnerable areas that every warship protected with its forward armor. The Cree vessels, designed for frontal engagements, struggled to turn and face this new threat. In the confusion, the remaining 9 human ships surged forward. Keithnar watched in disbelief as the human fleet attacked. They did not fight like a defensive force. They fought like predators. Small ships worked in pairs and trios, coordinating their fire to overwhelm larger vessels. Damaged human ships did not retreat. They pressed closer, fighting harder, as if their wounds made them more dangerous rather than less. The first Cree warship exploded. The observation deck fell silent. Vallard's confident expression had vanished, replaced by something Keithnar had never seen on his senior's face before: confusion. And underneath that, the first traces of fear. A second Cree ship died, then a third. The enemy formation was breaking apart as commanders tried to respond to attacks from multiple directions. The human fleet was everywhere at once, striking and retreating, drawing fire away from their damaged companions, sacrificing position to protect each other. Keithnar realized he had stopped recording. His hands were shaking too much to hold the equipment steady. "This is not possible," Vallard whispered. "The numbers do not allow for this. They should be destroyed. They should be running." But the humans were not running. They were hunting. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice came over the intercepted communications, shouting orders to her crippled squadron. "Tempest is down! Ironside, cover her escape pods! Hellcat, you're with me! We've still got guns, and we've still got targets!" The Hellcat had lost half its crew. Its engines were failing. Its weapon systems were running on backup power, and its commander was leading it back into the fight. Keithnar added a note to his log, his fingers trembling as he typed. "Initial engagement does not match predicted outcomes. Human forces displaying unexpected tactical flexibility and willingness to accept damage. Cree advantage is less decisive than anticipated. Continued observation required." He paused, then added one more line. "Something is very wrong with our models. These humans do not fight like they are supposed to." Through the observation window, another Cree warship broke apart in a ball of fire, and somewhere in the chaos, the human fleet kept coming. Keithnar abandoned his prepared observation templates after the first hour. Everything he had been trained to record, every metric he had been told to measure, none of it applied to what he was watching. The battle unfolding before him did not fit any known combat model in the Valorian archives. The humans were not fighting like a cornered species, desperately defending their home. They were fighting like something else entirely. Every move was aggressive. Every sacrifice was deliberate. Every death seemed to buy something more than just time. Chief Tactical Officer Sam Delgado coordinated the battle from the Steadfast's combat center. Keithnar had tapped into the human communication frequencies hours ago, and now he listened as Delgado issued orders with calm precision. The man's voice never wavered, never showed fear, even as ships died around him. Wolfpack 3, target the cruiser on bearing 047. Wolfpack 1, draw fire from the carrier group. Everyone else, keep moving. Dead ships, don't shoot back. The humans call their tactics Wolfpack formations. Small groups of ships working together to isolate and destroy larger vessels. It was crude compared to Valorian military doctrine, which emphasized overwhelming force and mathematical precision. But it was effective. Terrifyingly effective. A human destroyer named Viper found itself cut off from the main fleet, surrounded by 3 CRT cruisers. The ship's captain was a young woman named Linda Hayes. Her vessel was outgunned and outmaneuvered. By every calculation, she should have surrendered or retreated. Instead, she ordered her ship to ram. The Viper accelerated directly into the nearest Cree cruiser, striking the larger vessel amidships at full speed. Both ships crumpled on impact, their hulls tearing apart in a shower of metal and fire. But in the chaos of the collision, the Viper's crew did something impossible. They evacuated. Escape pods launched from the dying destroyer even as it crashed into the enemy. The pods were tiny things, barely large enough for a handful of crew each. But these pods were different. Someone had welded weapons onto them. Small guns salvaged from damaged ships, bolted to the hulls of vessels meant only for survival. Keithnar watched the escape pods attack a Cree warship and felt his understanding of warfare crumble. "They are insane," the Lurth said. His voice was hollow, empty of the confidence he had shown before. No rational species fights like this. No rational species throws away lives for marginal tactical advantage. But Keithnar was beginning to understand that the humans were not throwing away lives. They were investing them. Every death bought something. Every sacrifice created an opening. The humans were trading blood for victory, one drop at a time. Lieutenant Nina Vasquez commanded a gunship on the outer edge of the battle. Her vessel had taken heavy damage early in the fighting. Half her crew was dead. Her engines were failing. A rescue shuttle from the Steadfast moved to extract her and the survivors. Vasquez refused. "Negative on extraction," her voice crackled over the communications channel. "Still got guns. Still got a job to do. Vasquez out." She turned her crippled ship back toward the enemy. Her weapons were barely functional, firing in stuttered bursts rather than the steady streams they were designed for. Her shields were gone. Her hull was open to space in 3 different sections. She destroyed 2 more CF vessels before her reactor finally failed. Keithnar pulled up historical human records, searching for something that would explain what he was seeing. He found wars that lasted decades. He found sieges where cities starved rather than surrender. He found battles where humans had fought to the last soldier, the last bullet, the last breath. He found a pattern. Humans did not calculate war the way other species did. They did not weigh the cost of lives against the value of objectives and choose the most efficient path. They factored in something else, something that existed beyond logic and reason. The humans called it many things: pride, honor, duty, vengeance. But underneath all those words was something simpler and more terrifying: spite. The humans would burn themselves to ash if it meant their enemies burned with them. They would accept any cost, pay any price, suffer any loss, as long as their enemies suffered more. It was not rational. It was not efficient. It was something far more dangerous. It was human. On the bridge of the silent witness, the Valorian analysts argued among themselves. Some insisted the battle would still end as predicted. The Cree still had numerical superiority. The humans could not win. But others were not so certain. They had seen the escape pods with weapons. They had watched dying ships continue to fight. They had heard the voices of human crews laughing as they charged into certain death. "We should leave," one analyst suggested. "We have enough data. There is no need to remain." Valor shook his head. "We were ordered to observe until the battle concludes. We will follow our orders." But Keithnar noticed that the senior analyst's hands were trembling. He noticed that Valor could no longer look directly at the battle display. He noticed that even the most experienced observer among them had never seen anything like this. 3 hours into the engagement, the kill counts were impossible. The CFT had lost 17 ships. The humans had lost 6. The ratio should have been reversed. The ratio should have been 5-1, in the Cree's favor at minimum. But the humans kept fighting, and the humans kept killing. Commander Reyes' voice came over the open channel again. He was not speaking to his fleet this time. He was speaking to the CF commander directly. "You came here to raid a colony, to take our people, to enslave our children." His voice was soft, almost gentle, like a parent explaining something to a slow child. "I want you to understand something. When this is over, when the last of your ships is burning, I want you to remember that you could have chosen differently. You could have left us alone." There was a pause. "You didn't. And now you're going to learn what that costs." The CRT commander responded with threats and demands and offers of negotiation. Commander Reyes did not reply. Instead, the human fleet began a new maneuver. The surviving ships spread out, moving to encircle what remained of the Cree Armada. It was not an attack formation. It was a containment pattern. The humans were not trying to destroy the enemy anymore. They were trying to make sure none of them escaped. Keithnar added a note to his observation log. His hands were steady now, though his thoughts were not. The humans appear to have shifted objectives. They are no longer fighting to defend the colony. They are fighting to annihilate the enemy force completely. No quarter, no mercy, no survivors. He paused, then added one final line. "I do not think I understand this species at all." 4 hours into the battle, the mathematics of war had become meaningless. Keithnar stared at his display, trying to make sense of numbers that should not exist. The Cree fleet had lost 23 ships. 23 warships reduced to debris and fire and silence. The humans had lost 8. By every metric the Valorians used to measure combat effectiveness, the humans were still losing. They had started with fewer ships. They had lost a higher percentage of their fleet. But the Cree were breaking. Keithnar could see it in their movements. The precision that had marked their initial assault was gone. Ships moved in jerky, uncertain patterns. Formations fell apart as captains made independent decisions born of panic rather than discipline. The CRT were not fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to survive. The humans gave them no room to breathe. Commander Reyes had moved the Steadfast to the center of the battle, where the fighting was thickest and the danger was greatest. His flagship had taken dozens of hits. Entire sections of the hull were open to space. The ship moved slower now, wounded and limping. But it kept moving. It kept fighting. And where the Steadfast went, the rest of the fleet followed. "All ships tighten a ring," Reyes ordered. "Nobody gets out. Nobody runs home to tell stories about what happened here. We finish this today." Now the human ships formed a sphere around the remaining Cree vessels. They were not attacking from one direction anymore. They were pressing inward from every angle, compressing the enemy fleet into a smaller and smaller space. Escape routes disappeared one by one. The CRT commander tried to break through the encirclement. He gathered his remaining ships into a wedge formation and drove toward what he thought was the weakest point in the human line, a gap defended by only 2 damaged frigates. It was a trap. The frigates fell back, drawing the Cree deeper into the pocket, and then the human ships on the flanks closed in, catching the enemy in a crossfire. 3 more CE vessels died in the span of seconds. On the silent witness, the analysts had stopped speaking entirely. They stood at their stations in silence, watching the battle with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror. Vaylor had retreated to the back of the bridge. He would not meet anyone's eyes. Keithnar continued recording. Someone had to. The most terrible moment came when the humans began boarding operations. A Cree carrier had lost its engines early in the battle and drifted helplessly at the edge of the combat zone. It was still dangerous, its weapons still active, but it could not flee. The humans could have destroyed it from a distance. They could have left it to drift until its crew surrendered or starved. Instead, they sent Marines. The boarding shuttle was a small, ugly vessel with heavy armor and no weapons. It launched from a human frigate and crossed the gap between the fleets in perfect silence. Cree guns tried to track it, but the shuttle was too small and too fast. It reached the carrier's hull and burned through an airlock in less than a minute. 16 human Marines entered the enemy ship. Keithnar listened to their communications as they fought through the corridors. The squad leader was a man named Ryan Costa, a sergeant with a voice like gravel and ice. He gave orders in short, clipped phrases. "Move, cover, clear, next." The CRT outnumbered the Marines by hundreds. They knew their ship. They had the advantage of position and numbers. But the humans did not stop. They pushed deeper into the carrier, room by room, corridor by corridor, leaving destruction in their wake. "Sergeant, we've got hostiles converging on your position," a voice from the shuttle reported. "At least 60 contacts. Recommend immediate withdrawal." Costa's response was brief. "Negative. We're taking this ship." They reached the engine room 18 minutes after boarding. The CRE had sealed the doors and filled the corridor with defenders. There was no way forward. The humans were trapped, outnumbered, running low on ammunition. Costa made a decision. All units, seal suits and grab something solid. We're venting the compartment. The Marines activated their vacuum suits and magnetic boots. Then Costa opened the external doors. The atmosphere exploded outward, carrying everything that was not secured with it. CRE soldiers tumbled into the void, their bodies spinning away into the darkness. The corridor became a hurricane of debris and death. When the wind stopped, 5 Marines were still standing. They took the engine room. They took the bridge. They took the entire ship. Keithnar watched the human flag appear on the carrier's running lights and felt something he had never felt before. He did not have a word for it in his language. It was not fear exactly. It was not awe. It was something deeper, something that touched the oldest parts of his mind. The humans called it dread. Contact the fleet. Costa's voice came over the communications channel. His words were calm, almost casual, as if he had not just done the impossible. Carrier secure, minimal casualties, ready for further orders. Minimal casualties. 5 Marines left from 16, and he called it minimal. The battle continued for another 2 hours. The Cree tried to surrender 3 times. Each time, Commander Reyes gave the same response. You came to take slaves. You don't get to quit when it stops being easy. The last Cree ship died just as the sun rose over New Haven. It was a small patrol vessel, barely armed, crewed by perhaps 30 soldiers. It tried to run, its engines burning at maximum, making for the edge of the system and the safety of faster-than-light travel. It did not make it. A human gunship, so damaged it could barely fly, intercepted the fleeing vessel. The gunship's name was Fury, and its captain was a woman named Diane Cruz. Her ship had no shields left. Her weapons were almost empty. Her hull was more whole than metal. She rammed the Cree ship anyway. Both vessels broke apart in a silent explosion. The escape pods launched seconds before impact. The crew survived. The gunship did not. And with that final act of calculated madness, the battle ended. Keithnar looked at his final tally. 31 Cree warships destroyed, 9 captured, 0 escaped. The humans had lost 8 ships outright and had 4 more so badly damaged they would never fly again. Their fleet was broken, bleeding, barely alive. But they had won. No, they had not just won. They had annihilated an enemy that should have crushed them. They had taken a mathematical impossibility and beaten it into submission through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. Keithnar added a note to his observation log. His hands were steady. His voice was not. The battle has concluded. Human forces victorious. Recommend immediate revision of all tactical models regarding human combat capabilities. Previous assessments critically flawed. He paused, searching for the right words. We have been measuring the wrong things. The silence after the battle was worse than the fighting itself. Keithnar stood at the observation window and looked out at the debris field that had once been two fleets. Twisted metal drifted through space, spinning slowly in the light of New Haven's sun. Some pieces were large enough to identify as fragments of ships. Others were too small, too broken to tell which side they had come from. The human fleet had gathered near the planet. 4 ships remained operational, though that word seemed generous. The Steadfast was missing nearly half its hull. 2 frigates had been welded together using salvage from destroyed vessels, creating a strange hybrid that somehow still functioned. A single destroyer limped along on one engine, its running lights flickering, but they were live. They had won. Commander Reyes' voice came over the open channel, broadcasting to the colony below. His words were simple and tired. New Haven, this is Steadfast threat eliminated. Send medical ships. We have wounded. That was all. No celebration, no victory speech. Just a request for help and the quiet acknowledgement that the job was done. Keithnar made a decision. He walked to the bridge of the silent witness and stood before Valor. The senior analyst looked older than he had at the start of the mission. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. He did not argue when Keithnar spoke. I am requesting permission to decloak the vessel and make contact with the human fleet. Valor blinked. That is a violation of our observation protocols. I know. We are forbidden from interfering in any way. The battle is over. We would not be interfering. We would be offering assistance. Valor was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Do what you must. I will take responsibility for the decision. The silent witness decloaked. The effect on the human fleet was immediate. Weapons powered up, damaged ships turned to face this new threat. After hours of fighting, after losing friends and companions and pieces of themselves, the humans were still ready to fight again. Keithnar broadcast on the open channel, his voice trembling slightly. Human vessels, this is the Valorian observation ship Silent Witness. We mean you no harm. We have been monitoring your engagement. We request permission to assist with recovery operations. There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Then Commander Reyes' voice came back, calm as ever. Valorian vessel, this is Steadfast. Assistance accepted. We have crew in the debris field. Any help finding survivors would be appreciated. No questions about why the Valorians had been watching. No accusations about the observation mission. No demands for explanations. Just acceptance and a focus on the task at hand. Keithnar found this more unsettling than anything he had witnessed in the battle. The silent witness moved through the debris field slowly, its sensors scanning for life signs. They found survivors floating in damaged escape pods, clinging to wreckage, drifting in emergency suits with failing air supplies. Some were conscious, some were not. All of them were brought aboard the Valorian vessel for medical treatment. The first human Keithnar met face to face was a pilot named Beth Carver. Her gunship had been destroyed in the 3rd hour of the battle. She had ejected just before impact and spent the rest of the engagement floating in the wreckage, watching the fight through the visor of her helmet. When the Valorian shuttle found her, she was nearly out of oxygen, her suit systems failing, her body temperature dropping toward dangerous levels. She was also smiling. Keithnar helped pull her from the damaged cockpit of a destroyed Cree fighter. She had somehow drifted into the wreckage and used the enemy vessel's emergency supplies to stay alive. When she saw Keithnar, this alien she had never encountered before, this being from a species that had watched her people fight and die without lifting a finger to help, she did not react with fear or anger. She looked up at him with tired eyes and said, "Thanks. You got any water?" Keithnar did not know how to respond. He found a container of water and gave it to her. She drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Hell of a fight," she said. "We get them all." Yes, no Cree vessels escaped. Beth Carver nodded, as if this was exactly what she had expected. Good. Bastards had it coming. She fell asleep a few minutes later, still smiling. Keithnar returned to the silent witness and began composing his final report. He had been trained to write in precise technical language, documenting facts without emotion or interpretation. But as he sat at his console, staring at the blank screen, he found that he could not follow the standard format. Instead, he wrote what he had seen, what he had felt, what he had learned. He wrote about the 3 frigates that had charged through impossible odds to position themselves behind the enemy fleet. He wrote about escape pods with weapons bolted to their hulls. He wrote about dying ships that kept fighting until the reactors went cold. He wrote about 16 Marines who had captured a carrier and called their losses minimal. He wrote about Commander Reyes, who had looked at 40 warships and refused to run. He wrote about the pilot named Beth Carver, who had nearly died in the void, and whose first words to an alien species were a request for water. At the end of his report, Keithnar added a recommendation. The Valorian hegemony should pursue immediate diplomatic relations with humanity. Under no circumstances should hostile action be considered. These beings do not fight like a species that values survival above all else. They fight like a species that has decided survival means nothing without victory. They are not warriors as we understand the term. They are something far more dangerous. They are humans, and they do not know when to stop. He paused, his fingers hovering over the console. We calculate acceptable losses. They calculate acceptable victories. We ask how many we can afford to lose. They ask how many they can take with them. We fight to preserve ourselves. They fight to destroy their enemies, even if it means destroying themselves in the process. He added one final paragraph. The Cree came to take a colony. They came with 40 warships and overwhelming force. They came expecting a quick raid, easy prisoners, minimal resistance. Instead, they found 12 ships and crews who would rather die than yield. They found a species that turns mathematics on its head, that makes impossible things happen through pure refusal to accept reality. I was assigned to observe humans in battle. Instead, I watched a massacre unfold. But the humans were not the victims. The Keret were. Keithnar saved his report and leaned back in his chair. Through the observation window, he could see the steadfast limping toward the planet below. Medical shuttles were already rising to meet it. The colony had survived. The people were safe, and somewhere in the debris field, the broken remains of 40 Cree warships drifted in silence. A monument to what happened when raiders chose the wrong target. Keithnar had come to New Haven expecting to document the fall of a primitive species. Instead, he had learned something that would change the way his people saw the galaxy forever. There were monsters in the universe, creatures that could not be reasoned with, could not be intimidated, could not be stopped. The humans were not victims of such creatures. The humans were the creatures themselves. And Keithnar was very, very glad they seemed friendly. He looked out at the stars one more time, then began preparing for the long journey home. He had stories to tell, warnings to deliver, a species to introduce to his government before someone made a terrible mistake. The galaxy would need to learn what humanity was capable of. And perhaps, if they were wise, they would learn from the CFT's example. Some worlds were not worth raiding. Some people were not worth fighting. Some battles were better left unfought. The humans had proven that today, and the universe would not forget.